Jacob Carter stood at the edge of his inherited land, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the dew-kissed grass. The 80-acre expanse stretched out before him, a tapestry of wild flowers, towering oaks, and meandering streams. To the untrained eye, it appeared as an untouched wilderness, but to Jacob, it was a sanctuary, a living memory of his grandfather's legacy. His grandfather, Samuel Carter, had been a man of principle and resilience. A World War II veteran, Samuel had returned home to build a life rooted in simplicity and harmony with nature. He had purchased the land decades ago, nurturing it with care and instilling in Jacob a profound respect for its sanctity. "This land is our heritage, Jacob," he would often say, his voice tinged with reverence. "Promise me, no matter what, you'll never sell it." Jacob had made that promise, sealing it with the earnestness of youth. As he grew older, the world around him changed. Urban sprawl crept closer, and developers eyed his land with increasing interest. Glossy brochures arrived in the mail, showcasing visions of gated communities and luxury homes. Each offer was more tempting than the last, but Jacob remained steadfast. He saw through the veneer of progress, recognizing the loss of heritage and the erosion of natural beauty that accompanied such developments. The Homeowners Association, HOA, was the most persistent. Representatives visited, armed with persuasive arguments and lucrative proposals. They spoke of economic growth, community, development, and the benefits of modernization. But Jacob, with his calm demeanor and unwavering resolve, declined each offer. He knew that once the land was sold, its essence would be lost forever. Unbeknownst to many, Jacob had taken steps to protect his inheritance. With the help of a meticulous attorney, he had established a conservation easement, legally binding the land to remain undeveloped. This covenant, buried deep within the property's legal documents, was his shield against unwanted encroachment. It was a testament to his foresight and dedication to preserving his grandfather's legacy. Years passed, and Jacob pursued a career in environmental science, further deepening his connection to the land. He traveled extensively, studying ecosystems and advocating for conservation. Yet, no matter where his work took him, his thoughts always returned to the 80-acre haven that awaited his return. Upon returning from a research expedition, Jacob was met with a shocking sight. The once pristine landscape had been transformed. Rows of identical houses stood where wildflowers once bloomed. Concrete driveways replaced meandering trails, and the sounds of construction drowned out the melodies of birdsong. The HOA had proceeded with development, disregarding his ownership and the legal protections in place. Jacob's heart ached at the sight, but his resolve hardened. He meticulously documented the unauthorized development, gathering evidence of the violations. With the support of legal counsel, he prepared to challenge the HOA's actions, determined to uphold the promise he had made to his grandfather. As he stood amidst the altered landscape, Jacob whispered to the wind, "They thought they could erase our legacy, but they underestimated the strength of our roots." Jacob Carter had always believed that silence could be a weapon, a tool sharper than any blade, quieter than any gun. He had learned from his grandfather that some battles weren't fought with noise, but with patience, foresight, and ironclad paperwork. He never imagined that one day he would need every ounce of that wisdom to defend the very soil his family had guarded for generations. The first signs of trouble were subtle. It began with a letter from the county clerk's office, a notice of zoning review for adjacent parcels of land. Jacob had seen similar notices before, routine, harmless administrative background noise in a rapidly growing county. But something about this one felt different. The wording was vague, the lot numbers oddly familiar. He marked it and planned to investigate further. But then he was called away. A university research grant pulled him to the Pacific Northwest for 6 months. Before he left, he made sure everything was in order. Land taxes paid, boundaries recorded, easement clauses intact, and legal protections in place. His land, bound in a conservation trust with stipulations that strictly forbade unauthorized development, was airtight. Or so he believed. What Jacob didn't know was that wheels were already turning behind the scenes. Enter Brightstone Developments, a name whispered in real estate circles with both admiration and suspicion. Led by a man named Blake Kessler, a charismatic developer known for aggressive expansion and political connections, Brightstone had one goal: build fast, sell faster, and deal with the paperwork later. Kessler wasn't interested in Jacob's family legacy. He was interested in square footage, profit margins, and the glittering promise of a luxury housing project just outside the booming city. Kessler's partner in this endeavor was the Sunny Pines HOA, a self-proclaimed elite community board known for micromanaging everything from lawn heights to mailbox paint. Their president, Sandra Holloway, was a woman obsessed with perfection and power. She saw Jacob's wild land as an eyesore. To her, it was wasted potential that could be turned into a model community of upscale homes, fountains, tennis, courts, and wine tastings under string lights. She had already envisioned the groundbreaking ceremony, the ribbon cutting, her photo on the front page of the local paper. The problem was Jacob still owned every inch of that land. But to Sandra and Kessler, that was merely a technicality. Using forged documents and claims of abandonment, they began petitioning the county under the guise that Jacob had left the land derelict. They pointed to his absence, his lack of permanent residence on the property, and fabricated evidence that taxes had gone unpaid. It was enough to trigger a review, and once the paperwork reached the right political hands, greased palms and campaign donations did the rest. Permits were approved quietly, not through public hearings, but through emergency zoning exemptions buried deep in municipal agendas that no one ever read. By the time the first bulldozers arrived, the land had already been subdivided, on paper, into 96 perfectly manicured lots. The earth moved fast after that. Trees fell. The wild grasses were stripped away and replaced with artificial sod. The stream that once carved gently through Jacob's land was rerouted into a concrete drainage pipe. Roads were paved, electricity wired, water lines dug, and homes, cheap carbon copy homes, sprouted like weeds, beige and soulless, yet marketed as modern rustic retreats. Prices started at $750,000 18 months. That's all it took. By the time Jacob returned from his research trip, the 80 acres that once sang with wind and birdsong were humming instead with lawn mowers, construction drills, and real estate open houses. He stopped his truck at the new, gated entrance and just stared. A sign mocked him. "Welcome to Holloway Meadows, where peace meets prestige." The audacity stunned him. They'd even named the subdivision after Sandra. He didn't drive through. He didn't storm in. Instead, he turned around, went home, and opened his legal files. He wasn't angry, not visibly, but beneath his calm exterior, a storm brewed. He read every page, every clause, every notarized document he had kept over the years. Then he pulled out his grandfather's leather folder. Inside were the original land deeds, complete with signatures, and a small handwritten note from his grandfather. If they ever come for it, make them regret it. And so Jacob began to move, not with the haste of the developers, but with the precision of a surgeon. He contacted his lawyer, an old-school legal pit bull named Martha Dillon. She had helped Jacob draft the Conservation Trust Agreement years ago and had always warned, "The day you need this, it better be bulletproof." It was. Together, they went over every inch of documentation, the restrictive covenants, the environmental protection clauses, the reversion triggers, and the statutory violations. Every piece was in place. Meanwhile, inside Holloway Meadows, residents celebrated. Their homes sold quickly, with a waiting list of buyers. HOA members patted themselves on the back. The newsletter praised Sandra's visionary leadership. A community Facebook group bloomed with photos of backyard barbecues, tennis league sign-ups, and glowing reviews of the development's proximity to the city. It was then that Jacob received a letter. Stamped with Brightstone's logo and signed by Sandra Holloway herself, it read, "Dear Mr. Carter, we understand that recent development has taken place on land previously associated with your family estate. Please accept our sincere apologies for any confusion. As a gesture of goodwill, we would like to offer a settlement of $250,000 in exchange for a retroactive property rights adjustment, ensuring clear title for the homes now standing on the property. Warm regards, Sandra Holloway, President, Holloway Meadows HOA." Jacob didn't respond, because the trap had already been set, and now they had walked into it. What the HOA and Brightstone hadn't realized, what they had failed to uncover in their rush to build, was the unique legal structure Jacob had created around his land. The Conservation Trust was written in such a way that any unauthorized development not only nullified the builder's claim, but it triggered a reversion clause, one that transferred all improvements made, homes, roads, infrastructure, to the rightful landowner. In other words, the moment they broke ground without his permission, Jacob became the legal owner of everything they built, and he had documentation, time-stamped footage, and expert testimony to prove it. Drones had captured the first bulldozer rolling in. GPS logs from his conservation inspections showed that he had never abandoned the land. Surveillance footage from a trail camera caught Kessler's contractors marking trees for removal weeks before the permits were supposedly granted. It was all there, ready for court. Jacob didn't respond to their letter because he didn't need their money. He already owned everything they thought was theirs, and soon they would realize that their pristine little neighborhood was built on his land by his rules under his control. All that remained was the reckoning, and it was coming. Jacob Carter stood on the ridgeline at dawn, overlooking the rows of homes that stretched across what once had been his family's untouched land. The rising sun painted everything gold, even the roofs he hadn't built. The irony was poetic. The very people who thought they'd erased him had instead erected a monument to their own arrogance, and now it was time. He had waited long enough. The lawsuit was already filed. It was a single, elegantly brutal legal bullet, titled simply, "Carter vs. Brightstone Development et al." A suit that named the developer, the HOA, and even the title companies that had cleared fraudulent deeds. Attached to the front page was the master key, the reversion clause. Years earlier, Jacob had sat with his grandfather and an old real estate attorney, Martha Dillon, in a dusty law office filled with oak furniture and stacks of yellowed casebooks. Jacob remembered that afternoon well. He was only 27, barely beginning to understand what it meant to own land, let alone protect it from the wolves who circled quietly, waiting for the old man to pass. That day, they crafted something remarkable, not just a conservation trust, but a layered fortress of legal protection. Martha, a woman feared in every county courtroom within 500 miles, had raised an eyebrow and said, "If we do this right, Jacob, no one can touch your land without your say. Not even the state. But if they do, they'll pay in blood and brick." The heart of their creation was simple but lethal, the reversion clause. It stated that any unauthorized development, occupancy, or sale of any portion of the land, whether in whole or part, would result in immediate and automatic reversion of ownership of all improvements on the land to the rightful title holder, Jacob Carter. No compensation. No negotiation. It was ironclad, reviewed by 3 different legal specialists, and filed publicly where no one bothered to look. Jacob had known that one day someone would come for the land. He just never expected they'd come, so stupidly. Back in the present, Jacob leaned over the hood of his truck, scanning through the filed court documents on his laptop. Every exhibit was neatly labeled: GPS coordinates, drone video footage with timestamps, cell tower pings showing his regular location updates while traveling, trail cam footage with date stamps showing construction activity before permits were granted, a forensic report proving alterations in county records, and perhaps most damning of all, a signed affidavit from a former Brightstone project manager, disillusioned and quietly furious, who claimed he had been told to just move forward. The land's owner's gone. Jacob's suit hit the county like a meteor. The HOA members, previously basking in their weekend wine tasting events and string light barbecues, were the first to hear the rumblings. A simple email went out from their lawyer on a Thursday evening. Subject: urgent, land ownership dispute. Most ignored it. Sandra Holloway, however, did not. When she opened the attachment, her heart dropped. The suit wasn't just a demand for damages. It was a claim of full property reversion. In layman's terms, everything they thought they owned now legally belonged to Jacob. She immediately called Blake Kessler, the developer and the man who had promised her this entire empire. "Kessler," she hissed through the phone, pacing across her living room floor. "You told me the permits were solid. You said the land was cleared." There was a long pause on the other end. "Sandra, I thought it was. The county clerk said the trust was inactive. The taxes were delinquent. We pushed it through. You lied," she snapped. "You lied, and now we're sitting on 96 houses that legally belong to a man who hasn't even walked through the damn front gate." But Jacob had walked through the gate, twice in fact, quietly, dressed plainly, once at night, once at dawn. Nobody had recognized him. He had even smiled at a dog walker who waved, unaware he was greeting the true owner of their cul-de-sac. While the HOA scrambled in panic and Brightstone called in a fleet of lawyers, Jacob did what no one expected. Nothing. He didn't issue a press release. He didn't go to the news. He simply let the suit do the talking. It was slow, deliberate suffocation. A reminder that real power didn't need a microphone. The court process dragged out for 3 months. Each hearing added pressure. Sandra appeared in court twice, her once glowing public face now tight with stress. Blake's army of lawyers tried every angle: chain of title disputes, adverse possession arguments, even last-minute offers of settlement. But every motion failed against the same iron wall. The original deed and trust remained unbroken. The reversion clause was valid and triggered the moment a single shovel hit the soil. It didn't matter that homes had been sold. It didn't matter that families had moved in. Under the law, the land and every structure on it was Jacob's. Not because he wanted revenge, but because the law had always been on his side. The others had simply chosen to ignore it. As word spread, panic took root in Holloway Meadows. Realtors began pulling listings. Residents whispered in driveways, trying to make sense of it all. One man posted in the community Facebook group, "So wait, we don't actually own our homes?" Within hours, Jacob's inbox exploded. Emails from residents, some begging, some furious, some threatening. But Jacob answered none of them. Instead, he released one public statement through his lawyer. "The land was taken without permission. The law has responded accordingly. All matters are being addressed through legal channels. Until resolution, I advise all parties to refrain from further trespass." Trespass. That word ignited a storm. HOA attorneys tried to spin it, but title insurance companies began pulling back. Banks froze mortgages. Home values plummeted. One family, just weeks from closing a sale, was informed by the buyer's lender that the home had no transferable legal title. And then the ruling came. Jacob Carter was reaffirmed as the sole legal owner of the entire tract, including all structures built upon it. The judge's opinion was scathing. This is not merely a case of oversight. This is systemic fraud and willful ignorance. The plaintiff's rights were violated in broad daylight. This court upholds the reversion clause as legally binding and enforceable. All property reverts to the original title holder. The HOA collapsed overnight. Sandra resigned in disgrace, fleeing town shortly after. Brightstone was ordered to pay millions in damages and faced a criminal probe over document falsification. And as for the residents, they now lived in homes legally owned by a man they had never met, on land they had never paid him for. Some packed up and left, some stayed and waited. And Jacob, he didn't kick anyone out. Instead, he held a town hall. He stood quietly before a crowded community center, residents sitting in folding chairs, clutching uncertainty, and spoke plainly. I didn't build these homes. I didn't sell them to you. But I own them now. Every nail, every plank, every driveway. You're not my enemy. But this land is my legacy, and it was stolen. Silence. He continued. You were lied to. I know that. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to make it right. But understand, this is not your land. Not yet. Gasps, murmurs, then one hand raised. What happens to us? An older woman asked. Jacob nodded. What happens next depends on the choices you make. He paused, then gave them two options. Option 1, leave. No legal action from me. I'll even cover your moving costs. He looked around. Option 2, stay and lease your homes from me at cost. No interest, no profit, just enough to maintain the land. You'll have 5 years. At the end of that, we revisit terms. Together. It was an extraordinary offer. Merciful even. Jacob had the right to evict every single resident, but he didn't, because he didn't want revenge. He wanted restoration. By the end of the week, nearly 90% chose to stay. And so, Holloway Meadows became something else. Not a subdivision, not an HOA, but a community with a single landowner who walked its trails every morning, knowing every fence post, every stone. The man they once tried to erase had become their quiet guardian, and in the county records, amid all the filings and footnotes, one clause remained bold and untouched. Any unauthorized development shall result in full reversion of property to the original title holder. It was called the clause, but to Jacob Carter, it was justice. The courtroom was suffused with a tense hush, like the breath held just before a storm breaks. Jacob Carter sat silently at the plaintiff's table, watching the proceedings with calm but steely eyes. Opposing counsel volleyed their objections, with desperate fervor, attempting to poke holes in the ironclad fortress of legal proof Jacob's team had painstakingly assembled over the past year. But the evidence was undeniable. The forged deeds, the ignored reversion clause, the fraudulent approvals. The very documents that Brightstone Development and the HOA had proudly waived as proof of ownership were, in truth, their own undoing. Judge Merrick, a seasoned jurist known for his no-nonsense approach, leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples before slamming his gavel. Enough, he said, his voice heavy with finality. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Jacob Carter. The words echoed like a clap of thunder in the hushed room. Every member of the courtroom, lawyers, reporters, homeowners, even court staff, momentarily froze. Then, like a wave breaking on the shore, a ripple of shock and disbelief spread through the crowd. Jacob allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. His long battle was finally crowned with victory. Not just a win in a legal dispute, but the restoration of something far greater, his family's land and his rightful legacy. The judge continued, All structures and properties built on the land originally owned by Mr. Carter shall be considered his property, effective immediately. Any occupants currently residing on said property must either negotiate a lease with the plaintiff or vacate the premises within 90 days. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. Murmurs erupted from the back rows. Residents who had once felt secure in their homes were now confronted with the terrifying reality. They were living on land they did not own. The HOA board members exchanged nervous glances, their confident facade shattered. Brightstone's lead attorney visibly paled, realizing the magnitude of their defeat. Outside the courthouse, media vans crowded the steps, reporters shouting questions as Jacob calmly exited the building. Flashbulbs popped as he was approached for interviews, but he offered few words. "They thought I was just a farmer, some hillbilly with an empty field," he said quietly. "But I was watching them dig their own graves, one foundation at a time." Brightstone Development immediately filed for bankruptcy protection, citing the lawsuit's devastating financial blow. The company's assets were frozen, and several executives found themselves under criminal investigation for falsifying documents and conspiracy. Regulatory agencies launched inquiries into the county's permitting processes, uncovering a web of corruption and negligence. With the legal battle behind him, Jacob turned to the daunting task of reclaiming and restoring his land. The subdivision, once a bustling community, had become a patchwork of uncertainty and fear. Many families chose to leave, unwilling or unable to face the upheaval. Others opted to stay, hoping to negotiate terms with the new owner. Jacob approached this responsibility with the same meticulous care he had invested in the legal fight. He hired a team of trusted architects and planners to survey the land. His vision was clear. Half of the existing homes would be demolished, making way for open green spaces, community gardens, and walking trails, a sanctuary for both wildlife and residents. The other half would be renovated and converted into high-end rental properties, managed under strict guidelines that emphasized sustainability, community cohesion, and respect for the land. Residents who remained were invited to town hall meetings, where Jacob outlined his plans. "This isn't just about property," he explained. "It's about legacy, about respect. I want to build a community, not just a collection of houses." Surprisingly, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Many residents appreciated the chance to live under a landlord who cared deeply about the land and its future. Rent agreements were fair, with transparent terms and the promise of long-term stability. A neighborhood council was formed to give residents a voice in ongoing decisions. Over time, Holloway Meadows transformed. The open spaces flourished with native plants and wildlife returned. Community events were organized, farmers' markets, outdoor movie nights, neighborhood cleanups, rekindling a sense of belonging. The once tense atmosphere was replaced by cautious optimism and eventually pride. Jacob walked the trails frequently, a quiet sentinel watching over what had been reclaimed. His patience and resolve had turned a potential tragedy into a hopeful, new beginning. The trap had snapped shut, not as a cage, but as a protective embrace. He often reflected on the long journey, the stolen land, the betrayal, the court battles, the uncertain aftermath, and yet he never regretted the path he had chosen. Justice had not only been served, it had been transformed into opportunity. They thought they could take what wasn't theirs, he mused one evening, watching the sunset blaze across the ridgeline. But this land remembers. It remembers who it belongs to. And from that memory, a new chapter was born, one of restoration, respect, and a future built not on greed, but on roots. If you enjoyed this story and want to uncover more tales of justice, truth, and unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Welcome to Equal Eyes Only, the channel where we bring you real-life battles, hidden secrets, and powerful stories that demand your attention. Here, nothing is hidden. Nothing is off limits. We dive deep into conflicts that expose corruption, fight for what's right, and celebrate the triumph of the underdog. Every story is crafted to open your eyes and make you think twice about the world around you. So if you want to stay informed, inspired, and on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe to Equal Eyes Only. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, and join the conversation by dropping your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, knowledge is power. And here, it's for equal eyes only. Together, we reveal the truth, stand up for justice, and keep the stories alive. Subscribe now and be part of a community that sees it all. No filters, no secrets.